Hello and welcome to another Brawl video. Today we're checking out this blue-green +1 counter ramp deck as voted on by my supporters on Patreon, featuring Sab-Sunen, Luxa Embodied as our commander, a 5-mana 6/6 legendary god that has reach, trample and is indestructible, but Sab-Sunen cannot attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it, and at the beginning of our first main phase we have to put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then if it has an odd number of counters we also get to draw 2 cards. So there's a lot happening here, but once you see it in action it becomes quite clear, as Sab-Sunen essentially only gets to attack every other turn, and the other turn we also get to draw 2 cards. So it's a very nice card draw engine, and in this deck we're going to try to mitigate some of its drawbacks by making sure we can always put an extra counter on Sab-Sunen, so it not only gets to draw 2 cards each turn, but also gets to attack and block as if it didn't have any drawbacks whatsoever. So taking a look at our deck breakdown here, we've got a pretty big ramp category since we are trying to cast a 5-mana commander, so we've got lots of cheap ramp cards, as well as plenty of landfall synergies and landfall payoffs to make sure we get additional value out of playing our land drops. And then we've got additional ways to put +1 counters on our creatures, so that's how we can make sure that Sab-Sunen always has an even number of counters on it when we go to attack with it, and so it can also maybe block during the opponent's turn if we have to play defense. And then we've got a whole category of additional turn cards, because taking an extra turn is another easy way to make sure Sab-Sunen can always attack and block, while also drawing us extra cards in the process. And then we've got our miscellaneous section, which includes a few counter spells, a little bit of blue interaction to bounce the opponent's stuff back, and other cards that can maybe draw us additional cards as well. So that's our deck in a nutshell. Now for the deep dive, starting with our ramp cards, we've got all the 1-mana classics like Birds of Paradise, Delighted Halfling can also make our commander uncounterable, Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves. Utopia's Sprawl does have to enchant a forest, but we've got plenty of fetch lands to get them reliably. And then at 2 mana there's Explore to play an extra land draw card. We've got the classic Rampant Growth as well as some landfall creatures like Lotus Cobra, which can also be very powerful with fetch lands or effects that let us play an additional land each turn. Incubation Druid is also excellent here, since we have so many ways of putting +1 counters on our creatures, so we can reliably put a counter onto Druid, so it can tap for 3 as opposed to just 1 extra mana. And Fanatic of Ronas also plays very well with our commander, as it can now tap for 4 mana as opposed to just 1. Then a Growth Spiral and Planar Genesis, instant speed ways of putting an extra land on the battlefield. We've got Cultivate to find 2 basics, 1 in play. Harrow sacrifices a land to put 2 in play right away, so a great way to trigger landfall multiple times. And the World Wagon's also quite good, can also crew it with our commander, so it can immediately get an extra land once we play it. And then there's a Flare of Cultivation, which can maybe sacrifice a green creature to play it for free, otherwise it's just Cultivate. And then Uro can also be escaped out of the graveyard, putting extra lands in play, gaining life and drawing cards, also doesn't need an introduction. And then we've got even more ways to put extra lands in play. With Azusa we can play up to 2 additional lands each turn. We've got Dryad of Elysian Groves to play 1 extra land. Loot can also do the same, and can also activate for 6 mana to maybe find a creature and put it on the battlefield. Then we've got our Wayward Swordtooth, a 5/5 with Ascend, eventually getting the City's Blessing so it can attack and block, also letting us play an extra land each turn. And then at 4 mana there's Oracle of Moldaya, which can also play lands off the top, in addition to letting us play an extra land. Then we've got more landfall payoffs, such as the Mossborn Hydra, which can keep doubling the number of +1 counters on it, so it also plays well with the other +1 counter cards throughout. We've got a Nissa, similar to Lotus Cobra, can also find additional elves or elementals. The Tireless Provisioner can essentially make a treasure token each time we enable landfall. And then Courser of Kruphix gains us life and also allows us to play lands off the top. Invasion of Zendikar will find 2 basics when it enters, can also easily transform it with our commander, and then the Skyclave is another landfall trigger potentially, and a 4/4 that can attack and block. Then we've got Vorinclex finding 2 forests when it enters, so that's another way to make use of all those effects that let us play an additional land each turn, so we don't run out of lands in hand. And then we've got Tatyova drawing us cards with landfall, gaining a life as well. The Green Warden will double all our landfall triggers, as well as letting us play lands out of the graveyard, so also plays very well with our fetch lands. Illumra can also get all our lands back out of the graveyard when it enters, another card that's excellent with fetch lands and other landfall cards. Primeval Titan will find 2 lands when it enters or attacks. Bonnie can also draw us extra cards if we attack, maybe putting an extra land in play in the process, making a large creature that scales with the number of lands we control as well. And then the Walking Closet is just a better version of Crucible of Worlds, letting us replay lands out of the graveyard, and maybe we'll get to unlock the Forgotten Cellar to replay cards out of the graveyard, especially nice with the extra turn cards that don't necessarily exile themselves when getting cast in the first place. Then our +1 counter cards include Snakeskin Veil as a 1-mana instant that can also maybe protect a creature from removal by giving it hexproof. Can also use it just to enable Sab-Sunen, or maybe save it from a removal spell that would exile it otherwise. Then we've got a few ways to get additional +1 counters with a landfall. Bristly Bill is one of them, can also activate for 5 to double the number of counters. And then the Scythe Cat Cub can also be very effective if we enable it multiple times, as it can also double the number of counters without needing any additional investment. And then Retreat to Kazandu, a recent addition through Jumpstart, can either give us a +1 counter with a landfall or gain 2 life, so it's a bit more flexible than Roaring Earth, which is why I'm playing it over the 2-mana enchantment. Then we also have the Innkeeper's Talent, giving us a +1 counter at the beginning of each combat, so we can still draw our 2 cards with Sab-Sunen, and then as we go to attack, still get an attack in if needed, or stay back if that's better, and then eventually can also start leveling it up. Then we've got Evolution Sage, which lets us proliferate with landfall, so that's another way to get at least 1 extra counter on Sab-Sunen. Maybe we've got other creatures with counters on them as well. Then Fight Rigging is incredibly synergistic, as we get to immediately enable Hideaway and cast a spell for free. If we can target our commander, get it up to 7 power, and then another way to consistently add more counters to our creatures. Hadana's Climb can also quickly transform, and then the Winged Temple can maybe set up a 1-hit KO if we double Sab-Sunen's power and toughness. Zimone can also give us 2 additional +1 counters each turn, maybe doubling the number of counters if we activate it. And then I'm also trying the Aether Spark, as we can maybe suit up our commander with it, and then getting a nice attack in can give it a ton of extra loyalty, as well as giving us a +1 counter each turn, and then can also eventually add a lot of mana with a -10 or draw cards with a -5. Then we get to the extra turn cards, which often lead to an early concession from our opponent, so they are a double-edged sword if you're looking for a more interesting game perhaps, but Temporal Manipulation is excellent. We also have Time Warp, and these are the best versions since they're relatively cheap, and also go to the graveyard in case we have ways to get them back, maybe with our Forgotten Cellar for instance. Then we've got our Karn's Temporal Sundering, does exile itself, but can also bounce an opposing permanent, assuming we have a legendary creature or planeswalker to enable it in the first place. Part of Water Veil could also be Awoken, so we get to turn a land into a creature, but for 6 mana it's still fine. Then Elrond's Epiphany has been nerfed here in Brawl, so we don't get the bird tokens unless we foretell it first, and then it doesn't even get a discount, but at 7 mana it's still reasonable. And then Expropriate is quite pricey at 9 mana, but can either give us 2 extra turns or an extra turn and maybe steal the opponent's best card, so that can also be a lot of fun. And then Temporal Trespass we can often enable with our fetch lands, enabling Delve, so it's just a triple blue plus maybe some spare mana to take an extra turn. Then our miscellaneous section starts with Brainstorm, which is quite good with all the fetch lands, allowing us to shuffle cards we put back on top. We've got a couple counter spells. Wash Away is just too good not to include, as it can counter an opposing commander for just a single blue. And then Mana Drain arguably shouldn't be in the format, but is a counter spell that also helps us ramp. And then we've got some mass bounce spells with Cyclonic Rift and a River's Rebuke, so we have a little bit of interaction there as well. Rishkar's Expertise is excellent with our commander, as we can often draw 7 or 8 cards with it, while still maybe casting an extra turn card for free if we're lucky enough to draw into them. Kogla gives us some more removal, can also maybe blow up artifacts or enchantments if it attacks. And then the Great Henge can often be cast for very cheap once we have our commander in play, and can also draw us extra cards while giving us more +1 counters. And then the mana base is pretty straightforward, lots of blue-green dual lands, got the channel lands for added interaction. Castle Garenbrig I also like, since we have some green 6-drops that this can maybe ramp out. And then my only real utility land is Karn's Bastion to once again proliferate, and then a ton of fetch lands to enable landfall twice, plenty of basics to search up as well. So yeah, that's our deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play, facing Ketramose, so black-white exile control deck. Our hand's reasonable to start out. Can expect a lot of interaction. And an indestructible creature isn't gonna survive an exile effect necessarily. So this could be a very difficult matchup. But if we can get our card advantage engine rolling, then we might be okay. Path to Exile, not a disaster when played this early in the game, as it still ramps us. And Aether Spark also has good synergy with Incubation Druid. For now I still prefer playing my commander. And then a Rishkar's Expertise could be nice, putting a free Aether Spark into play. Opponent plays Ketramose, so we have a turn where we can do what we want. And Hadana's Climb's interesting too. So I think Rishkar's over Lotus Cobra. Looking at Aether Spark, maybe putting counter on Incubation Druids, gives us 3 mana, 4 with a land. Hadana's Climb, put counter on Druid is also an option. And then I would have 5 mana afterwards. Nah, I think Rishkar's still takes the cake. And then I can put a free Aether Spark into play, or a Fight Rigging. Fight Rigging does have higher upside if we hit an extra turn card. And we did not, but a Primeval Titan still looks decent to me. Cast a Titan. Get 2 more lanes. Make it castle, and then we can surveil with a Hedge Maze. And then look for one of those extra turn cards if possible. Hit you for 8. So yeah, that's quite the turn. We want to keep fetch lanes in hand. And maybe Courser of Krufix isn't super needed, but I'll just ditch an extra land or 2. Bastion could be useful. Yeah, I guess Courser can go. We might find one of those effects that lets us play an additional land. So then having both fetch lanes seems useful. Allegiance to Ashes exiles Primeval Titan. So with the Hadana's Climb we could threaten lethal here as our opponent marches the Incubation Druid. So our opponent seems dead to me. Get to draw 2, still no extra turn, but that's alright. Play Cobra, play Nissa, play Fetch Land. Sacrifice Fabled Passage. Lumra would be pretty decent to cast as well, but if we just cast Hadana's Climb, we'll get to immediately trigger it. Do have to be careful with Fight Rigging, that we don't put an odd number of counters on our commander. But now we can just activate and fly over for 20 damage. Sweet, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Korvold and Junt Sacrifice. This hand probably has too many eggs in the mana drain basket, as we don't have other great plays. So I'll take my free mulligan. This seems a little bit better. Can play an Elves on 1, turn to Cultivate if it survives. We'll have lots of cards going to the graveyard for Trespass or Uro. And hopefully we'll get to 9 mana to Expropriate, but that's gonna take a while. Alright, turn 1 Inquisition, probably takes either Elves or Cultivates. No, goes for Uro, so they might have a removal spell for the Elves. Still gonna get a Breeding Pool, and then turn 2 now Planar Genesis is a play we can make as well. It's going to be a Destiny Spinner instead. Alright, so we get to Cultivate. One of each. Should maybe prioritize blue mana for Trespass, but Uro needs double green, double blue. Then we got the Cauldron Familiar. And the Gilded Goose. It's like we're back in Eldraine. So I could play my commander. I could also keep ramping with Invasion of Zendikar. Yeah, don't mind deploying my commander. It's the most mana efficient play we can make. If they have an Edict effect, I can maybe sack the Elves instead. As our opponent plays Korvold. Sacking the Familiar. Okay, so we both established our commander and card draw engine. So, no way to put a +1 counter on Sab-Sunen, so we can attack with it this turn. Maybe, let's see, 3 cards in graveyard if I fetch. Can make it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So yeah, a little bit short of casting Trespass. So I'll start with Planar Genesis. Finding Mana Drain is tempting. So I'll take the Mana Drain. And then I can still explore, keep up Mana Drain. And I should maybe be playing the fetch lands just to enable Delve. And we can fetch our Surveil land with it too. So hoping they try and cast something big. Alright, Strider is good enough. I guess with Destiny Spinner, their creatures and enchantments are uncounterable. I guess I would still get the 3 mana here. Close call. Maybe I do let it resolve and save mana drain for a removal spell. Sure. Yeah, Destiny Spinner is pretty good against counter spells. We only have 2 in the deck, so it wasn't really on my radar. But yeah, Korvold hits us. We cannot block, even though we have reach. So we'll have to make the most out of it here. But we can maybe line up some additional turns. Otawara is a way to bounce Korvold as well. It's not the most exciting draw, to be honest. And I do still want to fill the graveyard for Delve. So Sab-Sunen can now attack. And then this is probably a Trespass turn. 7 cards in graveyard. I guess I can maybe attack the Invasion, transforming it in the process. And then still Trespass afterwards. So we'll still need to exile, let's see here, 6 cards from my graveyard. So I guess we'll leave Uro, otherwise keeping a fetch land could be useful for some of our effects that replay lands out of the graveyard. That resolves. Alright, so now I can expropriate, maybe stealing Korvold, and then taking an extra turn. Can I play Provisioner first? 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I should be able to, and even Utopia Sprawl. And then the Skyclave can either attack or make mana. We'll save the treasure. So I'll take an extra turn, please. So do we get 2 extra turns, or do I get to steal their best card? Alright, opponent's gonna scoop it up, understandably. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing the First Sliver, probably a 5-color good stuff type of deck. Our hand seems okay. Can replay lands from the graveyard. We've got a fetch lands. I'll start by getting a forest. And then Cub can give us more +1 counters. What we're missing is some actual ramp to play our commander ahead of schedule. For now, still happy to deploy the walk-in closets. Could also, I guess, play retreat and then next turn closet, replay fetch land. In case they have enchantment removal. Don't want to lose this. Alright, opponent with a relic, so next turn they can cast their commander. Mana drain is tempting, although even against their commander they would still get the cascade trigger, so I can only counter one of the 2. So in that case I'll just start with closets, replay passage, and get a bunch of +1 counters here. Fetch again. So we are hitting pretty hard. Hit you for 10. So if they don't have removal for the Cub, they could be in trouble here. Alright, the Fairy can just minus to get rid of it. Gives us the opportunity to maybe deploy our commander. Could shuffle away the Cub with Fabled Passage or Cultivate, probably have to if we want to play Sab-Sunen, or we could just play Vorinclex, which can pressure to Fairy, which is maybe slightly better here. So I'll just gain some life. And then we can still take an extra turn with Vorinclex in play. And we could even get some non-basic forests, breeding pool.
We need to move quickly.
There's a First Sliver cascading into a Growth Spiral. So they might still have 2 mana available here. Yep, so they could still have a counter spell up. And of course the Fairy also untaps 2 lanes. So if they have a counter spell, that would be bad, because I would love to Temporal Sundering, bounce First Sliver, finish off the Fairy, so we don't keep falling behind. So I think we need to risk it and hope to resolve the Sundering. So take an extra turn, bounce your Sliver. Could also potentially go for lethal if this works. Hit the opponent for 7 and then 7 again, and yeah, I guess that's good enough. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the play, facing Zahur, Glory's Past, so a sacrifice deck. Our hand has potential. Would love to draw another land so we can maybe save the fetch land and play it with Cobra on the battlefield already. Could technically sacrifice Cobra to cast a free Flare of Cultivation, but not super into that idea. This is also sorcery, so we cannot sacrifice an Uro to it, sadly. Which would be pretty sweet otherwise. Yeah, we'll start with Command Tower. Could have also fetched and gotten our Surveil land. But still holding out hope. Opponent with a Chromox. A card we could be playing ourselves. But, of course, green has other ways to ramp. So it's not essential. Alright, found another fetch land that works. So maybe fetch an island here. Play Cobra. And hope it doesn't get removed instantly. Alright, opponent does seem to have the Fatal Push. Or Tragic Slip. So then just sacking Cobra to Flare would have worked out better. Now a Liliana. Can still play Uro. And maybe keep the fetch land for future landfall creatures. Either way, we can play our commander next turn. Could have also opted to once again get the surveil land. Now Yawgmoth, also very powerful in a sacrifice deck. But yeah, at least our commander is not going to be all that easy to remove. Unless they've got a way to make us sacrifice a creature. And then I've got an extra turn card lined up. There's Zahur. And the Lich Lord to replay zombies out of the graveyard. So Liliana is probably interested in transforming this turn. They can sacrifice stuff to Yawgmoth. They're just sacking to Zahur's ability. Putting a Soul Trader in the graveyard. Could be pretty strong too. They can get it back with Liliana. So we'll see. Alright, opponent's just making us discard. So then Planar Genesis versus Flare of Cultivation is probably the decision. I'll get rid of the Genesis. Alright, Fight Rigging could be exciting. So Sab-Sunen cannot attack this turn, but Fight Rigging will change that. And then I can still cast a Flare of Cultivation, but we'll see what Fight Rigging reveals first. I guess our opponent could shrink down my creature with Yawgmoth, so I don't get the free Hideaway card, which will be part of Water Veil to take an extra turn. Alright, we get to take an extra turn. And probably just attack Liliana. Opponent already scoops it up. Yeah, take our extra turn, attack, take out their Planeswalker. Once again, draw 2 cards with our commander. Can take another extra turn with Fight Rigging, ensuring that we can keep attacking with our commander. So then it's just a matter of chaining together as many additional turns as possible. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Klotyhs. It's the Battle of the Gods. A red-green versus blue-green. Our hand's totally fine. Explore into Uro. Tatyova for card advantage. And then I don't expect many answers for our commander. And yeah, we drew Mana Drain, could be useful. For now, I guess I might want to fetch a Surveil land end of turn. Even though saving it for Tatyova is also reasonable. Opponent's got a Ruby into an Archamancer, so yeah, pretty nice ramp start with the Utopia Sprawl as well. So we could try and keep up Mana Drain this turn. Rishkar's Expertise is tempting. That's even more card draw. I do still need to find an extra land for Sab-Sunen. But yeah, maybe I just keep a Mana Drain this turn as opposed to playing Uro. If I knew for a fact I was drawing a blue source, I would go for it. Errata is also pretty good, and it's still a 3-mana card that we could counter. Yeah, I'll go for it since we may not get the opportunity to counter something else. And I think Klotyhs is more manageable, even though it does stop Uro from being particularly effective. So now I can play Sab-Sunen and still play Uro. Could also go Tatyova, play a land. But yeah, I think Sab-Sunen is the priority, since that's also going to give us a nice blocker for a turn. And then Rishkar's Expertise can play Time Warp for free, which sounds just perfect to me. Okay. So Uro's gone. Don't expect any attacks, but Grumgully can give them more +1 counters and a Spellbreaker. So it is a very aggressive build of Klotyhs. Draw 2. So we have options. Probably want to save Tatyova for next turn, so we can Tatyova into a Harrow, potentially. So yeah, for now, Rishkar's seems like the play. Finding a Great Henge, but yeah, got a Time Warp. Take our extra turn. Can save my fetch lands, but alright, opponent scoops it up, understandably. Next turn we could also River's Rebuke to send everything packing. But just a sequence of Great Henge, which pays for itself, into Tatyova, into Fetch Land plus Harrow, withdraws a ton of cards, and that'll do it. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play, facing Imoti, another blue-green ramp deck, although this one's quite different. Opponent's gonna try and cast into much bigger spells. That being said, our hand seems fine. Sawtooth helps discount the Great Henge, so we can maybe get that going. Small chance our opponent some sort of Cascade combo deck as well, in which case I maybe should have mulliganed for interaction, although it's not like we have many counter spells we can find. And I'll try and save my fetch land, although could have also fetched a Surveil land on one. Opponent with a turn 1 halfling, so at least they're not on Cascade combo. And then next turn, Sawtooth into another fetch land is looking good. Gwenna's scary too. Although Rebuke should be pretty strong as well. Play Sawtooth. Counter on Sawtooth to discount our Great Henge even more. And I'll save the fetch land for next turn, I think. Probably should have attacked for 4. Opponent casts Imoti. Cascading into a Bramble Familiar. Okay, see a Time Warp go by. Hullbreaker Horror, Mammoth. So yeah, you can see the Curve Toppers. Fabled Passage is still tapped. So our opponent is tapped out. Take my turn, and then we would like to put the counter here, even though we're probably not going to get to the City's Blessing yet, but it means I can play Great Henge for just 2 mana. And then still play my commander out. And now I can maybe put the counter on the Cub. And then once again, now we've already doubled our +1 counters, so I probably want to put it on Sab-Sunen, so that can draw us 2 cards next turn. And we now have the City's Blessing, so we can attack all out. Alright, opponent's at 12. And Rebuke could set up lethal, but we'll see what scary thing they can cast. Immortal Sun, that's acceptable, cascades into a Caryatid. So we should have it. Opponent lets us untap. I get to draw. I guess what we don't have is a land for Sab-Sunen to attack, but we don't really need it. So yeah, just casting a Rebuke should be game. Gwenna cannot make mana for counterspells, so they would need a free counterspell, which I guess is possible. But nope, our opponent scoops it up. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the play. We're up against Azusa, so opponent's going to be putting a lot of additional lands into play. Our hand's got potential with Gross Barrel and World Wagon for ramp. Hydra has a potential win condition. And I just want additional lands here. Turn 1 Mystic. So we can pretend having a counterspell in hand. Could have also cast Gross Barrel main phase in case we draw into a 1 mana Accelerant that I can still play afterwards. But at least our opponent's gotta consider their options. Azusa will resolve. Suppose I could still draw into a Wash Away had I cast Gross Barrel in response. It's gonna be a Great Henge instead. Alright, so now World Wagon over Hydra. Could also curve Hydra into Sab-Sunen. I think World Wagon still makes the most sense. That way we can also speed up maybe getting the Great Henge down. And next turn I can crew the vehicle with our commander. Get another extra land. Opponent now playing lands off the top with Augur. And a birds. So they don't seem to have any lands left in hand. So it's all creatures, including potentially some scary curve toppers. But yeah, I'll still play my commander, I'll play Otawara, and then attack with a wagon. And then next turn we can hopefully deploy the Hydra, maybe benefiting from Great Henge right away. And Time Warp will look pretty excellent as well. Alright, let's see if our opponent can cast some scary curve topper. They got their value from Augur, finding lots of extra lanes. So now they've got 9 mana available, enough for some Eldrazi. Maybe we die to a Crater Hoof. And yeah, there's Crater Hoof, and that should just be lethal here. Alright, on to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Djeru and Hazoret, so an aggressive legendary creature deck. Our hand is maybe missing some early accelerants, although Brainstorm could find them. And we have a shuffle effect to go with it. So we'll try. Turn 1 Basri. And a Chrome Mox. So our opponent off to a quick start. Chrome Mox also helps them to empty their hand, so Hazoret can immediately attack. Mana drain's pretty exciting, so can maybe keep that available. Signet. So yeah, next turn they can cast their commander. I'll still Brainstorm and see what's up. So, assuming we mana drain Djeru and Hazoret, I can play my commander on the following turn. If they make a different play, then Flare could be a decent turn 3 option. But yeah, I'm probably not going to fetch main phase for an island, since I would be a little suspicious. So I can keep 1 card after everything is said and done. So, yeah, something along these lines is fine. And then I can pass fetching an island or a breeding pool. Opponent's got a tap land instead, so I would have preferred them just tapping out for a 5-drop. Skrelva's gone. Can always fetch a Surveil land here. And then keep a mana drain again next turn. Primeval Titan's not bad either, blocks pretty well. So, yeah, I'll still hang on to my fetch land in case we find more landfall cards later. Keep a mana drain. Opponent's still not playing into it. I can just take 2 for a while. And then sooner or later we can cast something like Courser while keeping up mana drain. That's not quite this turn. So, play Castle and pass. Castle also lets us play Primeval Titan next turn. Captain Lannery. Yeah, I think that's still worth countering here. Even though it's clear that they're trying to play around a counterspell by waiting on their commander. Still get 3 mana. So I could cast Primeval Titan, maybe keeping up Cyclonic Rift for 2. Could also play my commander and something like Courser or maybe Oracle. Yeah, being able to use Castle here is pretty decent. So I think Primeval Titan makes the most sense. And then I can still keep up Cyclonic Rift. And getting Maybe some lands that would otherwise enter tapped. Could also get a fetch land for next turn. But I don't have a real landfall payoff in hand. I guess never mind. With Oracle, I probably want Fabled Passage as a shuffle effect. And then we'll keep up Cyclonic Rift. So we can bounce Djeru and Hazoret before it gets a chance to attack. It's going to be Elish Norn for 7 instead. That's a good one. So we'll let them attack first, and then we can bounce, so we get to eat a free Basri. Could have also been more patient, trying to overload Cyclonic Rift so they lose the Kromox mana, so they might not be able to recast it for 7, but I think we'll be alright. So this might be an Oracle of Moldaya turn. Can play it, maybe play some lands off the top, play my commander as well. And then I guess Oracle would die to Elish Norn, getting recast, but if that's their entire turn, we're still pulling ahead with Titan and with a card advantage from Sab-Sunen. And then Rishkar's Expertise, still pretty powerful, even if our creatures are a bit smaller. On to the next one. Okay, we're on the draw, facing Fynn, the Fangbearer, so opponent's gonna try and poison us to death. We have Wash Away as a cheap answer, and then Cub into Uro looks good. So we'll give it a try. Turn 1 Utopia Sprawl, so I'm actively hoping they try and cast their commander next turn, so we get to curve out, as opposed to having to keep up Wash Away. Although at 1 mana it's not that difficult, which is why the card's so good. But yeah, opponent's got a viral spawning instead, making a 3-3 with Toxic 1. Now I can Utopia Sprawl, although, yeah, I guess that's just my whole turn here, so I can keep up Wash Away. Probably still naming blue. And now a Ferox, 4/4 Death Touch. So yeah, opponent's got the perfect start to play around our Wash Away. Now I can Uro and then still keep up my 1 mana counter. And then eventually we can still try and overpower their current board. Especially once I get to play my commander and block for free, essentially. For now we're only taking 1 poison per turn. And yeah, opponent's unwilling to play Fynn, so they might have some instant speed fight effects available. I can still play my commander keeping up Wash Away, so that's probably the move, as opposed to Provisioner, which can make a treasure. So we'll have an indestructible blocker for the Ferox. And then next turn we still have other ways of maybe putting a counter on Sab-Sunen so it can keep blocking. Assuming we draw land for the Cub. Talon can also do that for us. Alright, so how close are we to casting Temporal Trespass? Not very. So it might be more of a Provisioner, play a land. Opponent probably has a fight spell. Maybe not. A 1 mana instant would have to be like a Tail Swipe. And then I kind of want to still play the Cub first. Could also just play a land. So now we get to a landfall counter here. And then I can still Rampant Growth. I'm gotta read this carefully. If this is the second time this ability resolved this turn, double the number of counters on that creature instead. So that would still work out fine. Could also spread out the counters a little bit more, but this seems okay. and then I'll save my treasures for next turn, I think. So we still have a 10/10 indestructible blocker available. No attacks. And then now we get to go off with our additional turn cards. Harrow also quite powerful. So, where do we start? Yeah, opponent's gonna scoop it up. So with a fetch land, we get to trigger the Cub twice. Harrow can give us 2 more lands, putting additional cards in graveyard in the meantime. So we can trespass, make lots of treasure. Can probably cast Lumra soon, which will give us even more landfall triggers. And then it's not going to be long before the Cub just generates a lethal attack with Sab-Sunen. Alright, so we get to see our blue-green Sab-Sunen deck in action, and our commander did a lot of work for us, drawing cards and also attacking for a ton of damage, and plays exceptionally well with additional turn cards. One of them is sometimes enough to get a concession out of our opponents. So yeah, that's going to do it for today's gameplay. Want to thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and as always, have a nice day.